You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Check, check, 1, 2. Looking like a little country, some rock and roll and blues. 'Cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we are with Anne Acker in her workshop.
Yes, my workshop.
Where she constructs and repairs a variety of instruments,
yes,
but particularly the harpsichord. And tonight it's really wanting to talk about the harpsichord and what makes the harpsichord sound like it sounds, what makes the harpsichord a truly romantic instrument. Welcome, Anne Acker.
Thank you. I'm delighted. I love my instruments.
Now, we talked a little with Anne before as part of the Savannah Baroque. And at that time, I was really interested in seeing and talking more about the harpsichord itself. There's such a variety of harpsichords. What I learned in our conversation with Savannah Baroque is I thought of a harpsichord as a singular, but there are whole families of harpsichords.
Yes, absolutely. There are different sizes, different configurations, and in particular, from different centuries and different countries, you have different styles of instruments which have different sounds, different construction, which leads to the different character of the sounds. We know harpsichords went back to at least the 1400s. We don't know a lot about them. There aren't very many left, but they generally were a bit smaller. They had one keyboard, whereas this one here has two, sort of like an organ. You have different stops like an organ. And they were very punchy, is what I like to say. They have a very almost coarse characteristic in the earlier instruments. This one in front of us right now is what we call a Flemish double. It's based on an instrument built by the Rookers family in Flanders at the time, which would be Belgium now. They were very, very famous. Generations of the family were building instruments. And I find this particular style of instrument has a very versatile sound, so that I can use it for French music, German music, English music, Italian music, Spanish music. Whereas if I was going to be a purist, I would need to use specifically a Spanish instrument for Spanish music and an Italian instrument for Italian music. I do have those kind of instruments. Back to this one. This one has two keyboards so that you have many different combinations of sounds. The harpsichord is a plucked string instrument. So this is the one of the sounds, which is what we call the back eight. It plucks the string further on the back so you get a rounder, flutier tone. This is the upper eight, or the front eight, which is more nasal. Those are both called 8-foot stops, which is after organ terminology. It has to do with the standard pitch had an 8-foot pipe. I can put those two together at the same time.
That almost sounds like two instruments playing together.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. We also have the 4-foot, an octave higher, which I can put in combination with other things. Or put everyone together, pull out all the stops. You don't hear 4-foots as much as I wish you did, because on most instruments they don't stay in tune very long. This one does. I also think it's the modern ear. 200, 300, 400 years ago, people liked a greater variety of sounds, and they liked sometimes sounds that we don't particularly like these days, which is interesting considering our penchant for electronic music with different quirky sounds in it. There are harpsichords which have what's called the arpicordium stop, where they put a bent piece of metal against the string when it buzzes. I don't have any examples of that right here, right now. French double harpsichords have a more shimmery sound than a Flemish instrument. French doubles were very popular for a long time. You would associate those with the French courts in particular. A lot of them were burned after the Revolution as a symbol of the aristocracy, so not many are left. We have German doubles, which have a different sound yet. I can't give you the tour because those instruments are in the house. I have a lot of harpsichords. The German double is all strung in brass, so it has a more direct sound. You don't hear them very often. The Italian instruments have a very, very light, very resonant case, so it's almost like hearing a big guitar with a keyboard. They're wonderful fun. Those should be in opera pits in particular. And then there are these little spinets, which have the keyboard perpendicular to the strings. Most of them are what we call the wing-shaped. It's like a grand piano where the keyboard is on one end, the strings run down parallel, and then on the spinet and what's called the virginal, you have the strings going side to side so that they're right behind the keyboard. And those have a lid that opens up towards you and blasts all this sound in the player's face, which is rather exciting, as opposed to out to the side like this one.
Now this is more like a classic piano in the sense of the way it opens to the side.
Yes.
And one would expect that this is an instrument that would be more meant to be shared, the music shared and performed, rather than if it's facing toward you, it seems like you're doing it for yourself.
For yourself, but also for smaller rooms.
Okay.
So you would set it on the side. Harpsichords were very popular, and in the towns and in the middle classes, you had the little spinets. So, in fact, they would even carry them place to place for parties. There is tales about people in England carrying their spinets in boats to go down the Thames to go visit their friends and play there, and also them escaping with their spinets when the Great Fire came. They would just grab them and run. These big ones, you can't do that very well. The spinet was also what would have been typical in Savannah in its early years, the little tiny ones.
Because you could bring it over on a boat.
Yes, they were less expensive to bring over, yes.
An instrument like this, because of its flexibility, you're more likely to play an instrument like this with, say, the Savannah Baroque, that plays a variety of different types and styles of Baroque music.
Yes, usually. I have smaller instruments that I sometimes take, depending upon what we're doing where. I took my 17th century style French single manual, which I took off to Greenville this last week to play there for multiple reasons. One, I was taking many harpsichords and I needed to fit everybody in, and it was a smaller church that we were performing in. There wasn't really room to place a big harpsichord, and a big harpsichord would have been too loud. That was great fun to use the small one for that.
But in a performance like you do here in Savannah at a church like St. John's,
yes,
you'd use a bigger harpsichord with more sound because
yes,
that's a more resonant room in a larger
yes,
cathedral.
I typically take this one, as a matter of fact, which, as you can see and your audience can't see, is rather pretty. It also looks very good on stage.
It's sort of a sky blue color with gold.
Yes.
And it also has Latin inside the lid.
That was traditional for Flemish instruments. In fact, there's also another Latin motto on this side that you can't even see, Dave, over here, which is on the lid flap. So typical of the Flemish Rooker-style harpsichord are these fancy block-printed papers that go around the keys, around the soundboard, and on the underside of the lid, and then those are further decorated with my little paintbrush and all those little swirly things, and then the Latin motto, which you can choose what you want to say. I have seen Hebrew models too by people who aren't into Latin.
Oh, okay. And are there traditional sayings that are included on them?
There are some that are more common than others, such things as Soli Deo Gloria, all for the glory of God is very common. That's on the flap of this one. This one is probably a bit novel. I came up with this one with a church. Laudate cordis et canticus laetis. My Latin's probably terrible, which essentially means we all sing together to praise him with our music. And sometimes you'll see things such as the Latin for science and art are forever, or occasionally people who are humorous will put practice makes perfect in Latin, such things. You see a big variety. There's actually lists on the internet where you can find of Latin mottos for harpsichords.
These are modern instruments.
Yes.
Well,
except for one sitting over there.
Okay. And of a design that dates to the
Correct.
1500s, 1600s, 1700s.
Correct.
Are there any surviving harpsichords from those years?
Yes, there are. Not a lot. There's one from the 1700s sitting in my workshop in the middle. It's quite decrepit. I intend to make a copy of it someday when I have time. Every few years I'll do a project for myself. I found that one. That was a funny story, if you want to hear a quick funny story.
Sure.
I get this phone call. I get phone calls all the time. Oh, I have this fabulous antique harpsichord piano. Are you interested? And I'm always dubious because often it's really nothing. It's usually a circa 1900 upright piano in terrible condition. And this person says, no, it's a real harpsichord. And I said, send me photos. So the photos come in on the email. My jaw drops. I send the photos off to my friend Loritz Libben, who used to be the musical instrument curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And he types back in all caps, go buy it now. So I met the fellow actually at a corner gas station in Macon with his truck and my van, because he was on his way to go to an antique show in Atlanta. So we met at this crossroads, and I crawl up and I say, yup, and I gave him a check and hauled it off. It was pretty funny. So it sits over there, making me happy and not doing much else right now, but it's really very, very old. And there are ones that are still in old palaces, old families, from way back when they were new. But there aren't a lot. There are not a lot.
Let's talk about the harpsichord itself. We'll take apart a lot of what you just demonstrated.
Okay.
First off, it plucks the strings rather than hammers the strings like a piano forte. How is the mechanism from the keys to the plucker?
Oh, this will be fun to describe without imagery. The key is a lever. Pivots on the key pin, which would be the fulcrum. On the back of the key sits a piece of wood called the jack. In French, les sautières, the little jumpers. And the jack has got in it a small piece called the tongue, which rotates on a little axle. And the tongue holds the plectrum, the plucker, which nowadays are usually made of a high-tech plastic. Sometimes we still use bird feather, bird quill, which is what they originally were, or sometimes they're a thick leather. So when the front of the key goes down, the back of the key comes up, which pushes the jack up, which pushes the plectrum past the string, lifts it a little bit, and lets go. As the jack comes back down, the tongue rotates on that little axle to let the plectrum come back under the string, and then there's a little piece of cloth, the damper, which comes down and quiets it again. That's the whole thing.
It plucks the string on the way down?
It plucks it on the way up and then bypasses it.
And bypasses it on the way down.
Ideally, if it's working properly, on the way back down. It just kind of runs around the back. There's also a spring that holds it, made of boar bristle or high-tech polyethylene, whatever, or sometimes wire.
Boar bristle.
Boar bristle, yes, the thick hairs from the chin of a boar, yes. I have a friend who supplies me with those from his boars. You have to have weird friends when you're a harpsichord maker.
I see. Do you tend to use the more traditional materials, such as boar bristles rather than plastic?
This one has plastic for the quills, but The strings on this one are bristle, yes. The paints I use are also made by a company that's been making them in Pennsylvania since the 1700s at least. This is all natural pigment. The fancy printed papers are made from the original blocks that were used in the 1700s. There's some people that have the blocks and they make the papers still. So the woods, the types of woods I use are the traditional woods. Well, we may have to make some changes on those as it's getting harder and harder to import things like grenadilla, which is what we use instead of real ebony. It's a type of ebony, and that's becoming restricted. The sides of the case are made from European woods. The soundboard is made from woods from the high Alps. Yes, definitely. Go with the originals. The hinges, the brass hinges I have, which you can't see from where you are too much, are copies of antique hinges that are cast out of brass, and then I consume many calories sanding them down.
Tonight we are with Anne Acker in her workshop. I noticed that the keys are black.
Yes, the naturals are black.
And the sharps and flats are white.
The tops of them are white.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the sides are black. That's actually cow bone on the top. That's very traditional. Some harpsichords are the other way. It depends. You can get them either way. There's no magic to having it one way or the other. Same with early pianos. The Viennese tended to have the black naturals and the white, the bone-slipped accidentals, but you can go either way, how you want it. And my Italian harpsichord has boxwood keys with cherry wood accidentals, so a yellow-brown and a more red-brown. And if you're really rich and famous, like the king or queen, they would have tortoiseshell or jewels or lapis lazuli on their keys. Not for every day, though.
Yeah, not for the everyday player. We have the plucking of the string.
Mm-hmm.
Now you mentioned the stops. What are the stops?
That refers to the configurations of which sets of strings and how many sets you're using at a time. So, like I said before, you have the lower 8-foot, the upper 8-foot, and the 4-foot. And we also have a buff stop, by the way. Which pushes a soft piece of, in this case, leather, sometimes it's cloth, up against the string to give you almost a lute-like effect. Very nice for the raindrops scene in Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Plup, 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 plup.
What's the function of the stop?
Color variety and volume variety. You can, in particular, if you have a double manual, you can be playing along and then have a little contrast and then go back.
And so one of those is one type of stop and the other is another type of
Yeah,
stop.
that's what they would call stops. It comes from organ terminology where they literally pull a knob.
Right.
But it's the same terminology, just adapted to use, perhaps not totally appropriately for the harpsichord, but for the concept.
And you use the term 8-foot and 4-foot.
Yes, again from organ terminology. Some harpsichords even have a 16-foot, very rare. That means an octave lower than normal pitch. So if you really want to add some basso to your sound. We know that Bach occasionally played a harpsichord with a 16-foot stop. Sometimes you'll find small instruments with a 2-foot, so 2 octaves higher, little fairy twinkling going on. They had child-size little spinets that would do things like that. They're very cute.
Okay. So that is to extend the range.
The color,
And the color
sounds.
And the color of the sounds. How many strings and how many keys on a standard harpsichord?
I don't know that there is such a thing as a standard harpsichord.
Okay.
There are...
And would that vary by country as well?
It varies somewhat by country, yes, by period and type, definitely. We kind of extended a lot of them in the 20th century. Some of the 20th century ones are a full 5 octaves, which is all you need to play all Mozart, because he had 5-octave pianos, and Haydn. Beethoven All his music for the first half fits in 5 octaves, and then it starts going past that. Before that, 4.5 octaves is very common. This one is about 57 notes, 56 notes, which is enough for most music. This one is also something they didn't have back then, which is it transposes depending on who I'm playing with. Nowadays we standardize Baroque pitch to mean 415, A415 cycles per second. So the A above middle C. Modern pitch is 440, 441, 442, depending on the orchestra. So if I'm playing with modern instruments, I can just shift the whole keyboard to the right, and then I'm playing everything a half step higher than normal. This one also shifts down to 392, which is called French pitch. And some of the French Baroque groups like to play at 392. That's a modern adaptation for the harpsichord. Although originally in Flanders, some of the double manual harpsichords had the keyboards a fourth apart. So one might be playing middle C, and then right above it would be the equivalent of an F, which they did to accompany, just to make it easier for your singers, I guess. And they had home pitch and church pitch, and it's very complicated. There are whole books on it.
The sound is very unique, and even though you don't have the ability to change the magnitude of the pluck,
right, the amplitude,
the
volume.
amplitude and volume, like you can on a pianoforte,
right,
there are ways that you can simulate
yes,
loud and soft.
yes, yes. One way we showed already was by the combinations of stops you use. You can have more stops. The other way is really with texture. A lot of time when you're playing harpsichord, particularly in a group, you're not really given much in terms of what you must play, except the bass line, the chords. So if you want it to be louder, you play more and maybe play it all at once. And if you want it to be less, you might make it thinner. Sometimes even 2 notes. As opposed to adding more. And of course, repetition or just... so it sounds quieter. There's a lot of games we can play. And of course the spaces between the notes are ever so important.
It sounds like, although each string, like say each person, may have only a certain amplitude to their voice,
Right.
when you add more voices, the amplitude goes up.
Exactly. Exactly.
Or if you have one person talking, in a crowd, for instance, if you have one person talking and another person talking individually, but then they start talking over one another because they're talking so close to one another
Right.
in their conversation, it sounds louder, even though physically it might not be. And so you're getting the same effect
Yes.
here of putting the notes closer together
Yes.
to sort of increase that sense of volume.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. Very good analogy. And another thing the harpsichord doesn't do like the piano, when you play the piano, it's literally throwing a hammer at the string, and as long as the note is down or the pedal is down, that string will keep vibrating for quite a while. These don't vibrate as long, so they tend to play games with, that's why there are so many trills in Baroque music, because it's a way of sustaining a pitch. You know, instead of starts to die off, but I can go as long as I want, or until my fingers get tired and fed up with me. So that's a big reason why there's a lot of ornaments in Baroque music, just to extend it. And it has the effect of making it seem more important, a little bit louder as well.
And as we talked about before, when we talked with the entire Savannah Baroque, the ornaments vary from country to country in terms
Yes.
of how much ornamentation seemed to be in style.
Yes.
With the French, very ornamented.
Yes.
And the Germans, much less ornamented.
Yes, yes. And the way the ornaments are written in the music depends upon what country and what decade and sometimes which composer, what they felt like. Again, yes, how many ornaments there might be in the English Elizabethan music. There's quite a few ornaments. There's a piece sitting in front of me that does that. You have to learn your ornaments. Sometimes when you first start playing this music, for example, when I first picked up the Fitzwilliam Virginal book, which is Elizabethan period music, Elizabeth I, who loved to play the virginal and loved to dance. And I look at what are these things that look like little double slashes all over the place, or single slashes, or scribbles, because I had never seen anything in all my years of piano study that looked like these. So you have to go look them up and learn the language. Just like you have to learn the language of how the music is played. Just like popular music or jazz music, it isn't played exactly like it looks on the page. It's not. So, if the Baroque music sounds boring, someone didn't do their homework or didn't know, which is more common.
Yeah. They're playing it as you would play from later periods, because you play the notes the way the notes written. Yes, although even then it's not quite so rigid, but it's more so. It's true. With the French using a lot of ornamentation to, say, extend the note, that also seems to increase the volume. Did the Germans use other of those techniques to increase volume, or were these techniques pretty much used across the board?
There was a lot more cross-cultural, we've discovered, than we used to think. A lot of traveling, even though it was very hard to travel. The Germans were going to Italy, they're going to France, the French are going to Germany, everyone's going to England. There was a lot more going on than we realized, so there was a lot of sharing. So there are similarities. Ultimately, though, a French piece sounds French, a German piece tends to sound German. I mean, Bach's French suites do not sound like a Frenchman wrote them. His English suites do not sound like an Englishman wrote them. But they have a little bit of the flavor of that. And, of course, Handel was born in Germany, worked in London, and had very Italianate style. So they're all over the place. The French like to play pairs of notes a little unequally, and the Italians never did. They used to argue about things like that. So a passage might have, just make it simple, the Italian would play it that way pretty much, and the French might go, or, and they would argue about lack of good taste on the part of the other side.
In that case, it would be written as if they were equal notes. But what the performer would do is take liberties
within the realms of good taste, à bon goût, always to good taste. So you have to know a little bit more about the character of the piece. And even then we disagree about such things, or how much you vary it, how much you swing it.
I'm now trying to think of like bebop harpsichord players.
Oh yeah, I've known those.
who really want to swing the note and not stick to a rhythm.
Yes. Well, there are freeform fantasy type pieces too. Thank goodness, it's so fun. Where they don't even put bar lines in. The audience can't see what I'm showing him. It has just big slurs and groups of whole notes put together, and then little notes in between. That's called an unmeasured prelude. So it gives you this chordal structure basically, but then you have room to improvise and play it with emotion, because as we said in the other interview, Baroque music isn't abstract and boring. It's supposed to be, the word they used was pathetic, but it doesn't mean pathetic like we use it now. Pathetic back then meant that it was supposed to elicit feelings in the listener.
Like pathos.
Yes, exactly, from pathos.
Real emotion.
whichever style it was. It could be happiness, it could be sorrow, it could be, and of course the Germans were really big on things having to do with sin, and the resurrection of Christ is all written in their music with different passages they use, and it was supposed to make you feel such things.
You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
If you enjoy our programming on WRUU-LP, please support the station with a donation. As an individual, you can give any amount, become a basic station member, or become a serious fan of the station. To check out membership rates and to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Again, to donate to the station, go to www.wruu.org/individual and select to donate monthly or subscribe to an annual membership. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU-LP.
The Savannah Bicycle Campaign has published a free cycling guide and map. The Bike SAV map contains downtown and county-wide maps, tips for safe cycling, and overview of state and local laws relevant to bicycling. The guides are available at local bike stores and other businesses, at City Hall, and online at bicyclecampaign.org/routes. Print copies available by emailing info@bicyclecampaign.org. You're listening to music local and sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight we are with Anne Acker in her workshop. Could we listen to something French?
This is French. This piece is actually written by Elizabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, who was a woman who played in the court of Louis XIV. There were not that many women who were working as professionals, but she was recognized as gifted very early on. She was considered one of the top players and composers, right on a par with the best male musicians in Paris at the time. So this is a prelude, unmeasured prelude by her. And then she heads into the rest of the suite. These suites are typically based on dance movements, just like much of Bach is. So that was a little French style.
The first part of the prelude didn't really seem to have a strong rhythmic base to it.
Exactly.
It's sort of like free-form rhythm.
Exactly.
And then it rolled into like almost a dance number.
Yes. It then goes into a cut time piece, from no bar lines at all to this little section of cut time, and then it goes back at the end
At the very end,
into
yeah.
no bar lines and these big slur marks and notes, big notes and little notes and dotted lines. And the first time I saw one of these, I went, what do I do with this? Now I love them.
And do you see a wide range of interpretation of that because of that?
Absolutely.
And that was meant to be.
Yes.
That it was meant to sort of highlight the skill and the imagination of the harpsichordist.
Yes. And maybe set the mood there in the room, because you're playing this in a salon with people sitting, partly listening, but also drinking wine and playing cards, which they did. Wish they would serve wine during the concerts. That's really the best way. House concerts are the most fun. Get their audience relaxed first and then start playing. Yeah, that works really well when we play.
What of that made it French?
Well, you heard the ornamentation, the types of ornaments. In particular, they use this little one called the porte de voix, which you don't see in the other ones, where you just come up. You come up before it and sigh into it, as opposed to more common. There's another one over here where you sigh down to it. The little bit, the leaning in, the little appoggiaturas.
Now, do they have a mark to indicate you do that? That you hit the note before and then lean into it?
The porte de voix has a little plus sign.
Okay.
Yeah. And the other ones in here, they has just a small eighth note. And then we have the mordent, which means the bite, the little bite, which you have in German music as well. And then, of course, we have these long trills going on. And in other French music, the ornaments just keep happening. Like, as opposed to a German allemande, a French allemande, it'll just keep going. Every single eighth note at the beginning of that measure has an ornament on it. We have two mordents, a trill, and a turn in the space of 4 eighth notes. And sometimes both hands are doing it. So it's like, how do I do that?
Does each hand do a different
Oh, yeah.
ornament?
Oh, yeah. We have. So the left hand was doing something. Sometimes they're doing it at the same time. Usually they're taking their turns. You have to not be afraid of ornaments when you play French music. And yet you can't stop the flow of the music.
Right. To have that forward
Yep.
and lilting and rhythmic, because the allemande is sort of this slow
This dance.
dance.
Yeah, I was playing that a little bit fast for an allemande.
Again, because all of these are traditionally dance rhythms,
Right.
typically, with a prelude being an orientation and an exposure to what the music
Yeah.
is going to be. And now it's time to settle down a little bit. Maybe put your cards down and pay attention.
No, they didn't.
Put your drink down and pay attention.
But yeah, we're actually playing now. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Maybe that's why they made the prelude so dramatic, to make everyone quiet down. Like, ooh,
There's music now.
listen to that.
Yeah.
Wow.
When else is going to come?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
So that was French.
That was French. That was French. I have some really early Italian pieces that we're doing at our next concert, which are from the 1500s, which are quite fun, and they show how. I mean, I remember in school hearing music appreciation type teachers saying how syncopation and off rhythms were something that came in like in the 20th century, which of course is absolute rot. So in these early dances you find a lot of them. Let me see which one. Yeah, this one will do. This is actually called the French Girl. I love those. I have sprinkled Italian dances here and there throughout the concert because they just sort of, okay, now we're going to change gear and do something else. And they're just so charming, so beautiful.
Yeah, so light, sprightly, upbeat.
They're dances, country dances.
Mm-hmm.
All the dance forms, well, not all of them, some are from the courts, but a lot of them are coming from country dances that get formalized. So would you like a little English music?
Sure.
Early English music first.
Now, the French Girl was actually an Italian piece.
That was actually from Venice.
About what year?
1540s, maybe.
Oh, so that's 1500s.
And it was by the prolific person Anonymous. Yes.
He wrote so much.
Wrote so many things and lived so long. Exactly. Now, this piece, the Queen's Allemande, refers to Queen Elizabeth. And apparently there was a popular tune, which everybody then knew, and we don't really know. So William Byrd, who was a very serious composer, very good composer, also would write variations on popular tunes. And so he wrote this set of variations on the Queen's Allemande. And she did love to dance. Let me make sure I get the right tempo on this. Okay.
Now that had a very interesting beat, more stately beat as it's going through. In addition to the clear ornaments, it seemed to have these strings of simply rapid passages.
Yes.
Like eighth notes.
Little eighth
that are
note.
running along with it. And sort of driving it forward, but not really ornaments, but
Yes, the
somewhat
little
ornamental.
ornamental fill-ins, improvisational types of fill-ins, but that bottom thing just keeps chugging along, and yet occasionally you have the pulse changes. Suddenly it's dun dun da 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 bump instead of keeping going like this. You'll hear that once in a while. Again, syncopation in a long time ago.
Tonight we are with Anne Acker in her workshop, because you do much of the transposition of pieces for the Savannah Baroque, and many of them are derived from originally harpsichord pieces.
Right. Or sometimes I take a piece, like the dances, the little Italian dances, the arrangements I have are for keyboard, but we're going to be doing them as a group. So I will give someone a melody line, I will back off and play chords. With Ashley, the soprano, we're doing some songs written by Thomas Arne for Shakespeare plays. And we add Gina in on some parts, and then a lot of them are written with the keyboard doubling the vocal line. And we don't need to do that, so then I'll just play something else based on the chords underneath. And that my part I don't even write down typically, but I will circle things, and got parts circled where it says, okay, violin plays this, flute plays this, and sometimes we'll write it out, but mostly we just circle and point and say, do something here. It's very collaborative once I do my initial, can you do this?
And I've noticed in past performances that, as you said, the singer, the flute player, the violin do the solos.
Yeah.
And you and the viola da gamba tend to hold down the bass.
Right. We hold down the bass, we set the bass line, everything's built up off the bass line. Compositional treatises from the 16, 17, 1800s first they teach the bass lines, and then they teach the chords, and then you work from there what you do on top of it. So everything is built up off of the bass. I taught a master class a few months ago up in Sumter, South Carolina, and I had these teenagers, and as soon as I said that a bit about the bass, it's all about the bass, this one boy's eyes light up, and he goes, I play the bass guitar too. And I said, well, didn't you know how to do this? We had a convert to the harpsichord that day. He was like, I get to play the bass line. in Handel, you can really see how the bass line is so important. Later English music, you know, he's just always coming along with that single eight. Driving that whole thing. Even in dances, there's a courant. And if you really listen to that and learn it first, then you can play. Keeps moving forward, so it's not just tucked underneath, it's the driver, but we let the sopranos think they're important.
And Handel, of course, most people I think would think Handel, oh yeah, water music, fireworks music.
Right. These keyboard suites of Handel's have been grossly underestimated because they haven't been being played right. I mean, Handel was kind of a rock star in his day, definitely. Very popular, women throwing their gloves at him because they didn't throw their beads like they do nowadays. So he wasn't playing. Which is how you usually hear that played.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't playing it that way. And like the saraband you hear a lot. That would make you throw your gloves at him, right?
If I wore gloves.
And you make it up. I just did that. So that's what they did. They just all had the language in their fingers, just like modern jazz players do. And that is something that we try to learn later, since most people like me were trained with, you will play these notes exactly. And it's been very liberating to then just, there's some stuff and I'll play something around it. It's authentic. It's absolutely authentic, because composition, improvisation were considered critical to any performing musician, right up into the first 2/3 of the 19th century, actually. Even a little later, Clara Schumann would practice playing fugues she improvised every single morning.
People treat the music of, say, Mozart with such reverence. Each note is reverence. Right. But that the fact that he could finish the symphony the night before after he'd been out drinking, because he hadn't done that before the commission was due the next day.
Right.
He was doing improvisation.
Absolutely.
And writing improvisation so for the later guys to play it.
Right. When you see the original Mozart scores for the piano concertos, there are some chords and some little notes and sketches, and that's really it. It's just an outline. And then you fill it in. He was filling it in. I'm sure he didn't play it the same way twice.
The two English works that we heard, first William Byrd,
right,
and then followed by George Friedrich Handel, those were written about a century apart.
Yes.
Because one was in the late 1500s, and then the other was the late 1600s,
right,
maybe even early 1700s.
Early 1700s, yeah.
And then the other was the late 1600s,
right,
maybe even early 1700s.
Early 1700s. Yeah. He was one of the three born in 1685.
Yeah.
Bach, Handel, Scarlatti.
Yeah. That's interesting because you're talking 3 generations separating that music.
And they're still using the harpsichord. Harpsichord was very popular right about 1800. And the early piano and the harpsichord were absolutely coexisting from the early square pianos in England. You're talking about 1760s. And of course, Mozart grew up playing the harpsichord, and then when he was becoming a young man concertizing, he decided to be different and take up this new piano thing that was going on. You see the works composed at that time, and it will say for piano or harpsichord. The harpsichords were getting more complex. You have English harpsichords that have got all these different combinations yet on them, different kinds of stops yet. They have what looks like a big wooden blinds on the top. It was called the Venetian swell, this big framework of wood, and you had these slats in it and a pedal so you could vary how much they were open or not. And if it was a battle scene, you could drop it very suddenly, bang. Battle pieces were very popular. One of these days we're going to do some battle pieces here for you guys.
That would be very interesting, because the fact that we have 3, 4, 5, 6 women, depending on the particular configuration of Savannah Baroque.
Right.
The music tends to be more love, romance.
So far.
I'm waiting for the battle scene.
Yeah, we're going to do them. We're going to do them. And I found some arrangements to include flute and violin now, too, so that's good. And I also have some news for next season, which is that I have now added, that'll be starting next season, 3 men.
Ah. Hence the battle scenes, okay.
No, I've played battle scenes myself before, because women did. They absolutely were playing the battle pieces.
And did you do it with one of the Venetian swells?
No, I actually was doing that on an early square piano when I played those, and had a friend narrating them. But the men I've added are Eric Keynes, who will be playing Baroque oboe. He's just moving to town this month. And I have added a baritone, Kyle Siddons, who is here in town. And we've added a tenor who will be coming up from Jacksonville as well.
And a true tenor, rather than a countertenor.
He's a tenor. He's a tenor who is absolutely trained in Baroque style. They're bringing so much expertise. I'm going to be much humbled. It's going to be great. We won't all be playing every concert, but we're going to switch around who does what, because the band gets too big and it just starts getting a little interesting with paying everybody. So, to be blunt. Next year we're going to be singing at some other churches that have hired us for their concert series, and they have budgets, so it's okay, let's see how many we can put in this concert or that concert. But it opens up a lot more possibilities for us for our pieces. Now that I can have some men singing, I can have duets, I can do some different parts. I've been dying to do some Ode to St. Cecilia type things. St. Cecilia is the patron saint of music, and St. Cecilia Day is my birthday, so I feel very closely connected to her. She's always pictured playing a keyboard instrument, so I feel even more connected to her. And there are some great pieces in celebration of her written by Purcell and Handel, but I needed some male voices in there. I'm still looking for an alto, people, so then we'll have a full set and can do some pretty amazing things once I have that. So, but with the good setup, I have now violin, flute, oboe, 2 sopranos, baritone, and tenor, and of course with the harpsichord and the gamba, we have our basso continuo. So, I'm pretty excited and amazed here in Savannah. Period music.
Do you perform solo?
I have, yes, I have. I prefer playing in a group better. It's more fun. And I think it can be hard on an audience to hear all the same instrument for an hour or more. It's just nice to have variety. But I do it, and I try to break it up. Sometimes I'll take multiple keyboards for sound.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, transportation.
Yes.
I've helped lug one instrument.
Yes.
It comes apart so that the main body of the instrument and the legs are separate pieces.
Yes.
So that makes it a little bit easier to transport.
Yes.
But it is a little bit cumbersome.
The big ones are... The biggest ones are almost 9 feet long. This one's 8 feet long. My smallest ones are about 6 feet and a lot lighter. They're not as heavy as they look. This one is about 160 pounds, so 2-person carry is not too bad.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
My Italian is about 35 pounds. Even though it's long, I can carry it myself, but it's a little awkward because it's constructed so very lightly. But yes, you need to have a van. I buy my vans and I go home and I take the seats out and I stuff them in the corner of my garage, never to be installed again. And I have my dolly, and I get very jealous of Gina walking up with her little bag with her little flute in it. It's And she doesn't have to tune it much. I mean, just shift a joint and she's tuned. And this particular instrument this one has 63 notes. So with 3 choirs and 63 keys, I have 189 pins to tune before performances and rehearsals. Smaller harpsichords, I have some that actually have only 1 string per note, so that doesn't take so long, and they're lighter. But it's a bit of a project to own one, yes.
So when you tune a harpsichord, do you twist the pin to change the amount of tension
Correct.
on the string to change its pitch?
Correct, exactly. We have a tuning, it's called a tuning hammer, because it's got this little hammer built on the top for banging the pins in if they get loose. But it looks kind of like a T, and you just rotate it one way to tighten it, to raise the pitch a little bit, and you rotate the other way to turn the pitch down, just like a violin pegs. Just a lot more of them.
A lot more of them. More than 4.
More than 4. They have it so easy. Just walk in, tune, all done. Plus I have to, if I'm going to be performing for a while in a space the harpsichord hasn't been in. A harpsichord is a complicated device for measuring relative humidity, so you have to get it there hours ahead of time and let it stabilize and then tune it. So I'm always having to show up way early, which is a bit of a bother. It's not for the faint of heart or people who just want to show up late and walk in and play.
And temperature.
The humidity is more important than the temperature,
Okay.
but temperature does affect the humidity. For example, if you have hot stage lights on, that's a biggie. I mean, if I'm playing at the Lucas with the Philharmonic, I have to make sure the guys get the lights on for a while before I tune, because otherwise it's going to change pitch during the concert. And of course, even when the bodies come into the room, like at the church, you get all these people in there whose bodies are emitting heat and moisture and they're breathing. It changes the room. So this instrument is quite stable. Most of mine are, but some are not at all, and they will really start going up in pitch as you move into the concert.
Now I understand why you want to have so much passion that it's breathtaking.
There you go. Well done.
Now, you build harpsichords.
I built this one.
How did you get into the business of building harpsichords?
Backwards. I was a pianist from the time I was very, very little. But I got to a point by high school where I just felt like I couldn't do what I wanted to do with the music on modern piano. Not for all music, but for some of the music. And in particular, I think Scarlatti was the groundbreaker, because I was learning Scarlatti, and I thought it sounded incredibly stupid on the piano. I don't know why people play Scarlatti on the piano to this day. And I had a friend who had a harpsichord, and I went and was playing. I was like, oh, this is guitar music. This is... And then Bach as well, they just come to life on the harpsichord. And then similarly for early pianos, because I'm also really big into all of the 18th and 19th century pianos, they bring something, the music that was written at the time of those pianos uses the way those instruments create the sound, the way they sustain, the way the overtones go, the way the fundamental of the tone comes in, where it comes in. They're all part of that. And suddenly it was like, oh yeah, I can do what I could hear in my brain on these instruments, which is so hard to do on the modern piano, which is a great instrument, but it's not ideal for a lot of early music. In particular, of course, Bach more or less transcends, but I still love it best on the early keyboards by far. So that was that step. Eventually, when my children were little, I was teaching a lot of piano at that time. And I went to a piano teacher's meeting where someone had brought a forte piano. And I was like, yes, this is one of the answers. And I became friends with the presenter. And then I went to another meeting, which was a group of talented amateurs and professionals who would get together once a month. This was in Madison, Wisconsin, which is a very musical and highly educated town, so there are groups like that around. We would go to someone's house once a month and play what we wanted to play. Sometimes it was something you were going to do in a concert, or it was a piece that you can't play at concerts because it isn't a good crowd pleaser, but it's the stuff we all like. It might be too big, too heavy, too this. So I went, and this fella had a harpsichord. And I sat down, I started playing the Italian concerto on his harpsichord. And he listens to it, and he goes, "Why don't you take it home?" "Yeah, sure, Jack." Ran into him at the store a few weeks later. "Oh, when are you coming to get the harpsichord?" "Yeah, sure, Jack." Third time I went and got it. And it needed work, and I started fixing it. And then the word got out that I could do this stuff, and I just started doing it. And then I wanted a harpsichord. So first I started buying ones to fix up to use, and then eventually that led to making harpsichords. I think it makes me a better player because I understand them kind of inside out, I guess you'd say, what goes into them. And I think it makes me a better builder and repair person because I'm a player. They have to make me happy. They have to be able to just do and say what I want them to do. But it does make balancing the time a little tricky. Does one practice or does one build? I have to balance the time and balance my hands too.
Do you ever now play harpsichords that you haven't built?
Yes. I own some that I haven't built.
Okay.
I have some that just came over from France that are made in a friend's workshop and use them in a concert. Those are for sale, but I use them in the meantime.
It sounds like because you've made instruments in specific styles, like the French style,
The French,
German style,
Italian, yep.
you would play the music more based upon the style of the keyboard.
The touch, they all have a different sort of touch. Because even though the keys basically look like a piano keyboard, but the keys are not sized quite the same. French instruments have narrower. They all have a much smaller front piece, the part in front of the keys, front of the accidentals than pianos do. Italian keyboard is a little wider, has a very shallow dip, very plucky, and they all affect how you play, definitely. I always say the instruments teach you what to do, as long as you pay attention and don't just try to make it do what you want it to do.
Are there performers who do better with different keyboards, since the keyboards seem to vary?
Definitely. I personally know of a head of a major Baroque orchestra who I love to pieces, and she only wants French keyboards when she goes out and rents. She has small hands, that's what she's used to playing. She doesn't want to have to adapt. It is tricky. Last week I was playing my French single, which has a narrow keyboard, and I came back and I'm like, okay, the chords and octaves are a little different size here, but if you do enough of them, you adjust. I adjust quite quickly.
Now this Flemish keyboard, is that more like the Italian with a little bit broader keys?
The Italian's a little wider yet.
Oh,
So we have French is narrower, Flemish is a little bigger, Italian's a little wider, and the touch as well. In a modern piano, the travel of the key is stopped underneath the key in the front. In a Flemish harpsichord, the key travel is stopped at the back of the key, over the key. At the French instrument, it isn't really stopped at all. And when you learn to play harpsichord, you need to learn to play just through the pluck and not keep going. You can get away with playing more piano-like on a Flemish, but it'll sound thumpy. But they go to play a French and they're like, the keys just keep going down. the accidentals will actually go below the natural notes if you don't know what you're doing on a French harpsichord, because you're not supposed to do that. That can be interesting.
Does the lack of the stop really affect the sound?
No. Except maybe you don't have a percussive element. Part of the sound of a piano is the percussive element of the wooden parts, the parts hitting here and there. People aren't really aware of that, but if you remove the percussive elements from the piano sound, electronically, working with the signals, people will not recognize that it's a piano playing. It's a very important part of the sound. So there is some element of that. With the harpsichord, you hear, without hearing it, you hear little sounds from the jacks moving, from the plectrum clicking on the keys, if you listen really carefully. So on a French harpsichord, you ideally, depends on who's playing, you aren't going to get any kind of a thump. In a Flemish, you'll get just a little bit of a thump. In Italian, you might have a fair amount, because so you get that. Again, an Italian harpsichord does a lot of that dance music, which should be almost percussive sounding. So they have a really raspy sound and that little bit of a thunk in it. So that's all part of it.
Would you like to play another piece?
Oh, what do we got? I know. We could play some Rameau. Hopefully I won't make too many mistakes. Play this one a lot. This could have mistakes in it, because I haven't played this in a long time. I looked at it quick a little while ago. Le rappel des oiseaux, the call of the birds. Because it's not all about dances. The French in particular wrote a lot of character type pieces. Rameau's got a lot of interesting stuff in it. You want one more?
Sure.
Let's see if we can do this one. Again, I used to play it, and we'll see. This is called the tambourine. And again, it's not stuffy French music. It's very country rustic dance stuff. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Not what you think of when you think of harpsichord music. Should be like,
Yeah.
right? It's a Bach. There's so much more there.
Yeah. Well, the first piece, you could hear the birds chattering to one another back and forth. And then again, this, rather than delicate dancing with large skirts and very formal, it seemed a lot more clumping around and a little bit more boots.
Exactly.
Not
Very
fine
percussive.
shoes, but boots.
It's a very percussive piece.
Yeah.
And you have these, like, these great chords. Again, I think most people don't tend to think of dissonances as part of Baroque music.
Yeah.
But absolutely.
From your description of the French harpsichord, even though this is Rameau, that sounds, I think, better maybe on a Flemish or other form of harpsichord because it's much more rustic, much more earthy.
I think so.
Would you have seen a German harpsichord in a French court?
You would have definitely seen Flemish harpsichords.
Okay.
The harpsichords by the Rookers family, which this one is modeled after, were famed, and if you wanted a super duper harpsichord, you got a Rookers or a Couchet, which was the successor, even though it's a French name. It was one of the descendants that became a little more Frenchified style, but they also, when the harpsichords got bigger in the late French period, they were cutting up and expanding Rookers harpsichords.
And did you change some stops between those two numbers?
I did.
Okay.
The birds was just on the lower 8, and then the tambourine I put both together.
Okay. To give it that more full rustic.
A little more color. When you play the two keyboards together as well, they don't pluck at exactly the same time. That would be for multiple reasons. One being it would be too hard to play because you're immediately twice as much pressure you have to go through, so they're slightly staggered. If I play the key very slowly, you'll hear one then the other. So when it's very subtle when you're playing together, but it's definitely slightly there. It adds to the color that they're as opposed to bah, just loud. It's this little thing in there which adds to the color.
Another question about the manufacture of them. Were you interested always in carpentry?
Yes. I don't know if genetics has anything to do with it, but my great-grandfather was a German woodcarver carpenter, and I was always interested in such things. My dad let me follow him around when I was a little girl and taught me how to use tools, and that was a time, I won't say how old I am, but little girls didn't do that. They don't do it enough now. And I started taking apart furniture and refinishing it when I was about 12. And helping my mom, fix things. Not an awful lot, but I've always really liked the way things go together. As one did in the Midwest at that time, we girls all learned how to sew.
Yeah, and you didn't have carpentry class.
No, we didn't get carpentry
woodworking class.
We didn't get to go to woodworking class like my daughters did. They got to do the 3-way rotation, with shop and home ec and art. We just had, if you were a boy, you took shop, and if you're a girl, you took home ec. But interestingly, sewing garments is not unlike building an instrument, except that with the instruments, the material isn't floppy. In some ways, it's easier. You glue them together, you cut them, but the precision and the three-dimensional nature of it, even though a garment is hollow, if you will, because the person goes inside it, the precisions I learned in sewing really helped prepare me, I think, for building instruments, to understand how they go together. I mean, I can sew a tailored jacket, and I can build a harpsichord. I don't do much sewing anymore, but it's not that dissimilar. And then, of course, the artistic components of it. A lot of builders don't do their own decoration, but I love it. Whether it's fancy painting or lettering, all those little arts and crafts projects and coloring books and things that my mom gave me when I was a little girl.
Is that all freehand or is it stencil?
That's freehand.
Yeah.
I create the lettering. You can see the designs on the walls over there. I create the letterings using historic patterns and styling, but then I size them, and then I carefully just mark the edges where they go and then paint them in.
Are there harpsichord manuals for building a harpsichord?
People have made plans which you can acquire. I have plans for various sizes of instruments. I also sell kit instruments, and they come with a manual for how to construct them.
So you sell the parts?
I sell parts.
And the manual?
And the manual.
For construction?
Yep, my first ones were like that. So it gives you, if you want to become a harpsichord builder, building a kit first. Just like if you're going to become a seamstress, work from patterns before you start branching out and modifying them or doing your own. It's the same thing.
If you bought a harpsichord kit,
Mm-hmm.
are there specific tools that you need, or standard tools will work?
For the most part, standard tools work fine. I don't even use many power tools, unlike most of my friends. Most people, if you have a number of basic tools, you do need a space to build it on. I have a workbench over there, which is 3 feet by 8 feet, for putting the main body on and various other work surfaces. But small instruments, I've had people build on their kitchen tables, students in their dorm rooms. Dave wants to build one now. I can see it.
Oh, I wish I had the time. I probably would at this point if I had the time.
Yeah.
Tonight, we have had Anne Acker and her Flemish harpsichord in her workshop perform for us. And I want to thank you so very much for allowing us to come here and see this beautiful instrument and hear this beautiful instrument. Honestly, it is a treat for the ear, but it is certainly also a treat for the eye.
Thank you. I've had really good fun. You asked great questions, and I love it. And your audience should know that you're getting to sit in the sweet spot
Ah,
right there.
and because I'm sitting right next to the open lid of the harpsichord, and unfortunately, I would be frowned upon when I go to the Savannah Baroque concert for sitting where I'm sitting. So
I wish we could do that. I wish we could. One day we'll have to have some salon concerts where people can just get right up around the instrument, which would be more authentic.
of course you do want to get it right up around each of the instruments and move around
Mm-hmm.
so that you could appreciate each of the instruments' sweet spot
Right.
during different pieces,
Exactly.
which would make it very confusing.
One of these days.
One of these days.
We'll put it on the list.
Exactly. But again, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
This has been another edition of Music Local and Sustainable, and I've been your host, Dave Lake. Save this time for another show next week.
Well, I know we ain't headed for the Hall of Fame. Gonna give it what we got, man, that ain't no shame. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.